Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 574. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone, and today, returning to the show is Will Porter. Will, how you doing?
Hey, Kyle, thanks, man. It's been such a long time since I've been on. I appreciate you having me back. How are you doing?
Doing well, Will. Happy to have you back to the show today. We got a lot to talk about on the show. You've written a couple great articles for antiwar.com, which, along with the Libertarian Institute, is where you find this show and pretty much all the work that myself and Will Porter do. So, Will, let's get into the news today. And we have some really important stuff to get through on the war in Gaza. I have a couple of news updates to just kind of end the week here on the show. A couple things that I didn't want to wait until next week to talk about. And then I think we have had a few really important developments in the past couple of weeks, but two things that didn't get enough attention are the Lavender program and the Hannibal directive. And so Will's going to, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. So let's get into today's show. The first thing I have up here is Top Dem questions F-15 sale to Israel. White House restates commitment to Tel Aviv. I wrote this one for the Institute on April 10th. One of the top-ranking Democratic members of the House questioned the sale of F-50 fighter jets to Tel Aviv as Israeli forces conduct a brutal war against Gaza. An increasing number of Democrats are now opposed to unconditional military aid and weapon sales to Israel. However, top U.S. officials insist that the policy of unconditional support has not changed. So Representative Gregory Meeks of New York, a top Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, expressed his concerns about the $18 billion sale of F-15s, 50 F-15s, and bomb kits to Israel on Tuesday. And I believe those bomb kits are JDAM, so they would upgrade dumb bombs into precision-guided bombs. And this is what Meat said. I want to know what types of weapons and what those weapons will be utilized for. I don't want the kinds of weapons that Israel has to be utilized to have more deaths. I want to make sure that humanitarian aid gets in. I don't want people to starving to death, and I want Hamas to release the hostages, and I want a two-state solution. And Will, I mean, this almost sounds like a spoiled kid at Christmas just listing off everything in the world they possibly want, even though they have no intention of changing their behavior or doing anything whatsoever. And so this is, I thought it was important that you have just a growing number of Democrats, Meeks, Pelosi, other high-ranking members in the party, calling for a change to the Israel policy, but so far, it's all been pretty limited. So while Republican and Democratic leaders in the Senate have already signed off on the sale, an increasing number of Democrats are questioning military support for Israel. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi joined a group of over 50 Democrats in a letter urging President Joe Biden to halt weapons transfers to Israel until there is a full investigation into the Israeli killing of 7 workers for the World Central Kitchen Aid Group. Pelosi previously said that military aid to Israel was the top priority in the Capitol and accused Americans who opposed the weapon sales of acting as agents of Russia or China. So I'm sure she supports the FBI investigating her now that she's changed positions there. Over the past 6 months, the American people have become increasingly less supportive of Washington's unyielding commitment to Tel Aviv, as Israeli forces have systematically destroyed Gaza, killing tens of thousands of Palestinians. Last week, an American aid worker, along with the entire WCK Gaza team, was killed by a series of 3 Israeli airstrikes. Those strikes prompted members of Congress to shift away from unconditional U.S. support for Israel. Still, the White House has no plans to end arms shipments to Tel Aviv, with Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin declaring that Washington plans to supply Israel with all the weapons it needs as the fight evolves. And this is Austin's quote: "The Biden administration is doing everything we can to make sure we get them what they need as quickly as possible. I would expect that as the nature of this fight begins to change to become a more precision fight, then their requirements should change a bit. We will stay abreast of their needs, and we will continue to provide security assistance as quickly as we can. We remain committed to helping Israel defend itself, but we expect that they would execute operations responsibly. And this is, just such a joke. We talked about in the last show, Will, how, or that was probably Wednesday's show, actually, that Austin, was asked by Tom Cotton about the Israeli genocide in Gaza, and he said we have no evidence of a genocide. This is as ridiculous as John Kirby saying the State Department has been conducting investigations and finding no evidence of any Israeli war crimes in Gaza. And this is so obviously so far from the truth. I think a lot of Americans are waking up and really realizing that there is something fundamentally wrong with the relationship between the U.S. and Israel, when Israel is doing things blatantly war crimes and constantly just getting apologies and support from the U.S. government anyways. All right, so let's go ahead, Will.
Yeah, so one thing that I would just hone in on here about that Austin statement is he mentioned this is increasingly going to become a precision battle. And I would just note that they're currently there's in the process of approving a sale of 2,000-pound bombs to the Israelis, which, if people are aware, those are not precision munitions exactly. Those are very destructive bombs.
Right. And, as Israel has a sight set on Rafah, where it seems, they'll likely just carry out the same kind of destruction they have in every other region of Gaza so far. So next up, I want to talk about this one from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com on April 10th. Biden walks back call for Israel to declare a ceasefire in Gaza. And this is kind of what I thought was the case when we talked about this on Wednesday's show. Will, President Biden had said that he wanted a 6 to 8 week ceasefire in Gaza, but now he said that this is up to Hamas. So going back to this idea that somehow there's going to be a hostage release deal between Tel Aviv and Hamas at this point, especially when, we'll get into this next story here. Israel seems to be doing everything they can to undermine and make sure that isn't the case. So Israel kills sons and grandchildren of Hamas political bureau leader. And the leader of Hamas's political bureau said Israeli airstrikes killed 3 of his sons and 4 of his grandchildren in the Gaza Strip on Wednesday. Israel confirmed it targeted his sons, but it said they did not have information about the killing of the grandchildren, which included 3 girls and 1 boy. And Will, this is, just obviously so problematic and something obviously meant to undermine talks. Here you had the Biden administration doing everything they can to try to get a hostage release deal done. And their main partner here, Israel, is constantly, undermining the talks. The last ceasefire deal that was agreed to in November, one of the main mediators for that agreement was a Hamas official stationed in Beirut, and he was actually killed by an Israeli airstrike in Beirut. And so, we've seen time and time again that Israel is willing to take some pretty extreme steps at this point. But some of these recent ones, attacking the Iranian consulate in Damascus and, assassinating the children of the Hamas's political bureau, seems to be, really meant to not only escalate the war, but ensure that Israel does not have to stop its offensive in Gaza. Yeah. All right. Next up, Will, I have one from CNN that I thought was worth talking about. It really confirms what we all knew, which was the Flower Massacre, where Israel opened fire on hundreds of Palestinians seeking aid. I believe that was last month, or it might have actually been in January, and killed February. Okay. And killed over 100 people. They say that they've examined the evidence, and it's pretty clear that the Israeli narrative there is incorrect, which means the Israeli forces did gun down a bunch of civilians just seeking aid. So this is what the CNN article said. CNN's analysis of dozens of videos from the night and testimonies from eyewitnesses cast doubt on the Israeli version of events. The evidence reviewed by forensic and ballistic experts indicate that automatic gunfire began before the IDF said the convoy had started crossing through the checkpoint, and that the shots were fired within close range of crowds that had gathered for food. The Israeli military released drone footage of the incident, claiming it showed a stampede in which Palestinians were trampled and the tanks were there to secure the convoy, but the quality and the editing of the video make it different to confirm the claims. The footage showed hundreds of people gathering around aid trucks on Rashid Street, and many of the people appear to be running and some crawling away in an attempt to seek cover, but the crucial moment capturing what causes the crowd to scatter is missing. The video cuts to showing bodies on the ground, though it is not clear whether they are alive or dead, in a location geolocated by CNN to be near the checkpoint. Recordings using night vision, the drone footage is only available video that gives a clear view of the crowds. If nothing else, it just shows how difficult it would have been to fire with any degree of accuracy at what the IDF described as suspects among the tightly packed people surrounding the convoy. And there's quite a few other details and some maps there in the CNN article that are worth looking at. It's a pretty solid piece of journalism from CNN exposing more Israeli lies, which they have done 2 or 3 times throughout this conflict. They really only seem to do it during the greatest atrocities, say when Israel's ripping up cemeteries without cause or something like that. But in these cases, they are doing some investigative journalism. Unfortunately, it doesn't really shift the overall tone that you get from CNN, where everything is still framed around October 7th is the cause of this. And, you know, we have to remember that the Palestinians started the war, so they were kind of asking for it and deserve this. Next up here is just, this was really chilling, Will. For anybody who's watching the show, there's a picture here of 2 babies, and you can see that their legs are so shriveled up and, you know, deprived of the nourishment that they need, that they can't even fill out their diapers. Is absolutely horrific. So Human Rights Watch said children in Gaza have been dying from starvation related complications since the Israeli government began using starvation as a weapon of war, which is a war crime. Omar Shakir, Israel and Palestinian director for Human Rights Watch, said the Israeli government is using starvation as a weapon of war, has proven deadly for children in Gaza. Israel needs to end this war crime, stop using this suffering, and allow humanitarian aid to reach all of Gaza unhindered. And of course, Will, this is just so important to point out, as our government is doing so much to help Israel maintain their blockade and their siege of Gaza. We have mainstream organizations pointing out what atrocities are being committed in our names. All right, one more here before we get into Will's stuff. And this is just crazy. Well, you have the American public turning against Joe Biden's Israel policy. And most people are turning against it because of the horrors that they see. They realize not only does Israel, you know, the Israeli government do what they want. It's not that our support for Israel gets their government to comply with our security concerns or anything like that. But more importantly, that Israel is willing to take the weapons that we give them and nor are asked not to commit war crimes with them and slaughter people at will, including American citizens. And so this seems to me to be a prime moment for Trump, who oftentimes has his finger on the political climate in America, to maybe make a huge change in a way that maybe only Donald Trump could really do, and declare Israel has gone too far and is no longer in America's interest to support Israel. But we have the complete opposite of that, of course. Trump says Biden has totally abandoned Israel. So this one from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Former President Donald Trump said on Wednesday that President Biden has, quote, totally abandoned Israel, and said many Jewish Americans who vote Democrat this November should have their head examined. Trump has been critical of Israel for sharing images and videos of their destruction in Gaza, saying that's why it's losing public support and international support. But Trump has also signaled he will strongly support the genocidal campaign against the Palestinians in the Strip. And Will, there was, you know, when Trump initially made those statements about seeing the horrific pictures coming out of Gaza, you kind of wondered the way he said that, if he meant he didn't want to see those photos anymore, in the sense of, I want Israel to stop doing what they're doing, I don't want these photos to exist, or if he meant, I want Israel to make sure these photos don't get out, because a lot of these photos are posted by the Israeli military and by Israeli soldiers. And so, it seems Israel could do a lot to really stifle these images coming out. And it does seem that Trump's real issue here was just with the fact that these images are coming out, not that these atrocities are taking place and that it exists at all. So Trump's latest comments came on Israel came after an interview aired of President Biden calling for Israel to declare a 6 to 8 week ceasefire, but he has since walked back that call, saying any truce should be linked to a hostage deal. Biden also said in the interview that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had made a mistake in Gaza and that he didn't agree with his approach, but Biden has been the biggest backer of Netanyahu's campaign and continues to provide military aid to Gaza. And just another real important observation here, Will, I think, is that the Biden criticism of Netanyahu is setting up something very important for the Democratic Party. The Israelis are doing and are going to do horrific things in Gaza to the Palestinian people. Things that many Americans may consider unforgivable and may call for the U.S. to fundamentally change its approach to Israel. However, if in 6 months, when Israel is done doing its killing in Gaza, Netanyahu, the Biden administration, all the Democrats decide, wow, that Netanyahu guy is a real lunatic, huh? He's quite a bit crazy. And some of those other lunatics in his government, like Itamar Ben-Gvir, are real problems, and we need to get rid of them. And they will shuffle those people off and move people like Benny Gantz and Naftali Bennett into leadership positions, and then claim, oh, see, we could keep supporting Israel because they now have a more moderate government. Now, just before we went on, Will, I should have put this tweet up, but I'm sure I will talk about sometime on the show next week. Benny Gantz actually said that Israelis who are now middle schoolers will be fighting in Gaza, Judea, and Samaria, which to the Israelis is the West Bank, and in Lebanon when they are old enough to fight. So he's talking about, this being a generational war and the Israelis to continue to fight within the next generation. All right, Will. You got a couple stories that you've written for antiwar.com recently that I wanted to talk to you about. This one, IDF admits to killing elderly hostage on October 7th. Will, tell us why this is important and what happened here.
But throughout this war, these hostages have obviously been one of the primary issues, how Israel can get them back. You just discussed some of the negotiations, the process over getting them back, and, what Israel should give up as a concession. That's been a huge debate. There's also the question of just how safe these hostages are, given the scope and the intensity of the Israeli bombing campaign and the response. And you've heard even from family members of hostages raising this question, which does seem fairly obvious when you consider that the hostages are being held by a group that Israel has vowed to completely bomb into oblivion and annihilation. And so, of course, Israeli officials and the military have kind of downplayed, just how much danger they're putting these hostages in. But occasionally we do get admissions that would seem to vindicate the concerns of some of these family members of the hostages. So most recently, last week, the IDF acknowledged killing a 67-year-old Israeli woman named Irfat Katz, who was shot by an Israeli gunship during the Hamas attack on October 7th. So this actually happened inside Israel proper, in a kibbutz near the border with Gaza. And the Israelis announced the results of their investigation last week. They concluded this was, of course, an accident caused by the confusion of that day. They do seem to have been caught off guard by the Hamas attack. Their response was very poorly organized and haphazard. You can even hear recordings of Israeli gunship pilots kind of saying they don't really know who or what they're shooting at during all this chaos. So it is pretty plausible that they may have hit some of their own people in that. So they have now acknowledged killing this elderly woman. This is months after the fact. Previously, they said they accidentally had shot 3 hostages during fighting inside Gaza last December. So those are 4 people in total, as far as I know, that they've acknowledged. But there seem to have been other cases of this happening that they have not admitted to or accepted blame for. So people may be familiar with this one kibbutz called Be'eri that's near the Gaza border that was attacked by Hamas on October 7th. And survivors there have said Israeli forces were basically firing into homes indiscriminately, and that some of those houses were completely destroyed with people still inside. In fact, people can hear an interview with local Israeli media with one survivor, Yasmin Porat, And she was asked very directly, like, did Israeli troops kill hostages that day? And she straight up says yes. At one point, she says they fired tank shells into a house full of people and they killed everybody inside, the hostages and the Hamas guys included. The Israeli government has not acknowledged those deaths. As far as I know, it's just the 4 that I've mentioned here, the 3 in Gaza and then this elderly woman. Now, they have said that they believe that at least 31 captives have been killed inside Gaza otherwise, but they haven't given any kind of cause of death for those people, whether they were friendly fire or some other kind of accident or being executed by Hamas or whatever else. I guess we can't really say, but just given the sheer number of bombs falling on Gaza every single day, I would say the most likely culprit for those other ones would be friendly fire by the Israelis. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense for Hamas to be killing their bargaining chips. That's the whole reason they took these hostages. And then, of course, you have to consider just the tens of thousands of Palestinians dying under these bombing raids. Like, I'm not really sure how the Israelis would distinguish between them and the hostages that are under the bombs that are falling. So effectively, that is the latest here. These 3, after those other 3 people they acknowledged last year, the Israelis have admitted to 1 additional friendly fire death with this older lady. I think it's highly likely there have been other cases of them killing hostages, but so far they have not acknowledged those. And now I guess one last thing I'll point out here is the Israelis do have an explicit policy known as the Hannibal Directive, which says that soldiers should kill their own men before allowing them to be taken prisoner. So say a Hamas guy is making off with an IDF soldier in a truck or something, the Hannibal Directive would say they would instruct his own unit to blow up the truck. That's better that everybody dies there than having this embarrassing situation where you might have to do a prisoner swap and make concessions. We're seeing this kind of issue now with the current hostage negotiation, where it's kind of a big headache and a PR mess for the Israeli officials. Now, the policy, this Hannibal Directive has been specifically applied to soldiers. As far as I know, I'm not sure of cases where it's been applied to civilians being captured. But I do think it's at least worth mentioning that this policy exists, that the IDF has decided that sometimes deliberately killing their own people is indeed appropriate. And one last thing I should note too is that as of 2016, the IDF officially says that it no longer uses the Hannibal Directive. But you can read interviews with Israeli soldiers saying basically that it is still in force, even if they're not calling it by that name. Even after October 7th, there are reports along these lines citing Israeli commanders saying that they have been ordered to bomb their own men. So even if they've officially renounced this policy, it does seem to continue unofficially.
Yeah, and I guess, one point to make here, Will, is why this is so important. It's not necessarily, I think, as some people like to point out, that this is some kind of big mark against Israel or for Hamas in the sense of, Israelis just like killing people, or Hamas wasn't necessarily guilty on October 7th when, obviously if you take somebody hostage, right? Like if a bank robber takes a bunch of people hostage and then the cops come in and kill those people, that doesn't absolve the bank robber of their guilt. It just calls into question if the police are additionally guilty. I think that the reason this is, of course, a huge deal is because October 7th was presented as evidence by the Israelis to the world that we are at all times victims of a potential genocide. And if we take our, take our boots off the neck of the snake, or, I think holding the wolf by the ears are sometimes expressions that people use, that if we do anything to relieve the pressure on the Palestinians, then they're going to attack and kill us. I think it was an Israeli prime minister that once said something along the lines of, we could forgive the Palestinians for killing our children, but we can never forgive them for making us kill their children. And I think this is really the attitude that we're seeing of the Israelis at this point, that, we have to kill them all. That's just, what we have to do at this point. I think they've been able to largely get away with that because of the narrative put forward on October 7th. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Will. Sorry, there's not really a question there.
No, I would agree with you too, that like, just to stress that like my intention here is not to absolve Hamas for the innocent people they've killed. I was recently just on Alan Mosley's show. We discussed cases of Hamas, like very egregious cases captured on film of Hamas committing what I would call atrocities, just slaughtering innocent people. So my goal here is not to say, it was all the Israelis killing their own, but I do think it is worth asking, and especially that's why I cite these family members of hostages. Some of them are raising these questions like, what happened to my loved one? Were they killed by a Hamas fighter, or were they killed by our own people here? And I think that's very much worth asking, and it's not absolving Hamas of whatever crimes they may have committed on that day and since.
Right. It's just, again, we've gone from 40 beheaded babies and mass rape to now, Hamas certainly was responsible for the deaths of hundreds of Israeli citizens. But when you look at the crimes committed by Hamas on October 7th, and what the reality was, it seems that what Israel is doing in Gaza is actually far worse on a daily basis. And I mean, it killing maybe a greater percentage of civilians than even Hamas did on October 7th. Sure. Which is really wild to think about. All right, well, next up here, let's talk about lavender. You have this really good article that we ran as a viewpoint at antiwar.com on Monday, April 8th. Israel lets AI decide who dies in Gaza. And, well, I think for me, this is so important. One of the kind of fundamental movies that shaped the way I looked at the world growing up was Terminator 2. And so there's a few things in there. In the movie, John Connor says to Arnold, I thought the U.S. and Russia were friends now. And so, the new Cold War always seemed ridiculous to me, because even in this movie, Arnold had to explain how the AI system would bait the humans into going to war with each other, even though the Cold War was over. The nuclear war schemes scared the pants off of me and made me terrified of nuclear weapons. And I was terrified of killer autonomous robots and thought something like that would never happen. And here we have, there's a couple degrees of differences between this and Skynet, but it's really not that significant anymore. So tell us what's going on here, Will.
Yeah. So I know this is something you have covered fairly extensively on the show, this overall trend. And I guess it was kind of foreseeable, just given how fast AI tech has been advancing lately. But more and more, we are seeing militaries studying and even using artificial intelligence in their operations. And I think Israel is kind of at the forefront of that kind of effort. They are at the cutting edge there. They use several different AI systems. I know you've covered some of them before, like the program known as Gospel, which I will mention in a second here. But most recently, we learned about another system called Lavender, which was described in a great report by the Israeli outlet 972 magazine. And they've done some pretty good coverage of this overall issue. And basically, this program takes a bunch of raw intelligence, a bunch of data, and crunches it all together. And then it spits out a target list of people and places to bomb. And of course, this is allowing them to generate targets at a far faster rate than human intelligence analysts ever could on their own. So just for example, in the first few months, the first few weeks of the latest war in Gaza, this Lavender program churned out something like 37,000 targets. So quite a few people that are being marked for death in like a very short period of time. Probably too many more than they can even keep up with. And it seems too, as Israel sort of develops these systems, the field commanders on the ground are relying on them more and more without reference to other outside intelligence or human input. So they're kind of just taking the machine at its word. They'll typing into Chat GPT, is this guy a Hamas target? And they take its word that it's not just some random guy. And apparently, one unique feature of Lavender is that unlike this Gospel program that was covered in a previous 972 magazine report, which had apparently focused on what they called power targets, which are larger and I think higher profile targets, Lavender is mostly like focusing on lower level Hamas fighters. And instead of killing them on the battlefield or in some kind of command post or in a rocket launching installation, they're targeting these fighters in their private homes. And when you look at some of the numbers that are put out by organizations like the UN, this all starts to make sense, because this has been a very consistent trend throughout this war, Israel bombing private residences. And these figures that I have are months out of date by now. But the numbers that I had last seen was something like 300,000 housing units in Gaza that were either damaged or destroyed by Israeli bombing. That's over 60% of all housing infrastructure in the whole territory. And given that they've continued to bomb every single day since, we can only assume that those numbers are worse, that the destruction is even more widespread now. So when you learn that the IDF actually has a special program that specifically singles out people's houses for airstrikes, it's not that hard to see how you get those numbers, how they rack up to hundreds of thousands of people. Like I said, in the first few weeks, they just had 37,000 targets. So you do see the deliberate and literal systematic. It is a system that is devised for the destruction of housing infrastructure. And according to 972 magazine, for whatever reason, this Lavender system is prioritizing homes as the first and best option for an airstrike, which of course inevitably means that huge numbers of civilian casualties, their family members, like the wives and children of fighters. And a lot of Palestinian households, not to mention, are multi-generational. So that's why occasionally you will see reports of like an entire family wiped out by an Israeli airstrike. sometimes they're all living under one roof. So when you go for these houses, you are guaranteed to be killing a lot of non-combatants. Traditionally the grandpa and the 4-year-old child and the wife are not considered combatants, but I guess under a total war doctrine, I guess maybe they are considered fair game by the Israelis. And as I already kind of hit on here, Lavender is not the only AI system that Israel is using. People can go read about the Gospel program in another great report by 972 Mag a few months ago. Your keyword there will be mass assassination factory. That's how one intelligence officer had described the system, which, by the way, these are Israeli intelligence officers talking about this. So, that's their sourcing. So the Gospel is also something they use to generate these vast target lists. And then there's another thing, and I think this kind of plays into what you were talking about with like some kind of Skynet style system. They have a system called Fire Factory, which uses AI to sort of automatically calculate the munitions payloads and assign targets to particular drones and aircraft once they're selected with the help of these other systems. So I don't think it's too far off. It's not too distant of a future where you can imagine a system automatically selecting somebody's house to bomb, and then another system automatically dispatches a drone to go and bomb their family. I don't think that's, not to be too much of a to be too apocalyptic here, but that sounds like it is on the horizon. So Israel does really seem to be leading the way here with this sort of AI-led warfare. There are other militaries, the Defense Department in the U.S. They're also studying and considering these programs. But I believe the Israelis are really at the forefront of putting this into practice. They're letting these AI systems make literal life or death decisions on the battlefield. So I would say that is sort of unique for them.
Right. And Will, I mean, the way you describe the program, it almost seems like, the humans are working for the machines and not the other way around, right? Where the machine will put forward a name and the human won't do anything other than to check if it's male. He says 20 seconds is all they spend on a name before approving it. And so essentially you're just, giving a thumbs up. It reminds me, I don't know if you remember this episode of The Simpsons where Homer gets one of those little birds that keeps dipping its nose because there's water in the bottom of it to do his work from home job to keep hitting the yes button. And that seems essentially, the way these soldiers are handling this, just hitting yes, yes, yes. And then as you say, they're selecting the bombs and the munitions. And so, they tell the Israeli soldiers, hey, put this size bomb on the plane. And they tell the plane to, the pilot to bomb this particular target. But at no point does it seem that an Israeli soldier is really making a decision. Now, this isn't to absolve them of guilt. Taking orders from a machine to carry out war crimes, makes you guilty of a war crime and incredibly stupid. It doesn't absolve you of guilt for carrying out that war crime, though. So, this is all just disturbing. Now, Will, I saw in your article here, and something I caught in the 972 piece that I thought was interesting and worth talking about is the Israelis kind of said they put this thing into practice because early in the war, they calculated it had a 90% success rate. And I didn't see anything really getting into how they calculated that 90%. And so it seems to me that it could all be made up. But the problem with that, I think, is even if that is true, in the past, what we have seen, and this was, some great reporting by Gareth Porter during the Afghan war, when you try to do this kind of network analysis to determine who's guilty, putting wrong people is going to lead to more and more wrong people, right? And not the other way around. So have you seen anything on like updates of how accurate they think this thing is now that it's been in use for 6 months, or if they claim it's just as accurate? I even remember from the article that they were messing around with whatever numbers, leads to the calculation that you are a member of Hamas to generate more targets.
Right. Yeah. I was also very skeptical about this alleged 10% error rate. I'm not really sure how they arrived at that. I'm sure they would claim that as they've used it, that it's, they've fed it, they've trained it more. These AI systems they work on a lot of training where you feed it more and more data. But as you're saying, I'm not exactly sure how they're deciding a guy as a Hamas fighter to begin with. Under the Obama administration, you had what was called, and this may be what Gareth Porter was referring to as well, I think, signature strikes. And that was basically where they just saw like these signs of life of where they think that certain activities and behaviors, like a guy standing outside on a cell phone at a certain time of day, means he's more likely to be a Taliban fighter. So I'm not sure if that's what the Israelis are doing here with the Hamas fighters and deciding that that's, basing their accuracy numbers on that. But yeah, I could imagine that they would say that the system has been, improved as time has gone on. And honestly, I'm kind of surprised that they haven't, outsourced a little more of the blame to the system. With that World Central Kitchen strike, I'm surprised they didn't say, "Hey, the AI said it was good. Like don't blame us." But that's something that would not shock me if it was something they said in the future.
Yeah, the only reason I doubt they might say that is in some perverse kind of way, Will, that might make Americans more terrified of the Israelis than less.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because I think there are a lot of people who, like me, are conditioned to fear AI and Skynet and the rise of the machines. It's a part of a lot of science fiction, and people really do. That is a big part of how we shape our culture and our ideas, and what we're concerned about in the future. I mean, there's so much more we could talk about here, Will, as far as particularly with accuracy. Oh, and by the way, that Gareth Porter stuff I was referring to is related to the night raids in Afghanistan. I think when they would go in, they would like get cell phones and then they would use that person's cell phone. But the problem is once you misidentify someone and you have their cell phone and you put their contacts into your algorithm as saying, oh, these are people we know are terrorists. So, then you get more and more wrong people and it gets more and more off. Also, right. Just judging by Project Maven, the US AI targeting system, I think they said that the accuracy is only 60% in good weather. It's 30% in the snow. So you could imagine if you have some inclement weather in Gaza, you either create like by a dust storm situation, or there was a significant amount of rain during, I think like November, December, January in Gaza. So how much that actually hampered the ability of their programs to use targeting and stuff like that, and knowing that they're getting the right person. And also we've seen a few times too where I don't know if the Israelis have omitted, but it seems pretty clear that the Israelis misidentified. They published, oh, we got this guy carrying a rocket launcher, turned out to be a bike or a stick or something like that. And right. Certainly when you have millions of people living out of tents, there's a lot of people carrying sticks and other building material around. So who knows how many people have been misidentified and just wiped off the face of the earth. Maybe their body buried by some Israeli bulldozer under a couple feet of rubble, to be found in a decomposing state in a couple months and tossed into a mass grave. I mean, just so many really horrific things happening to the Palestinians in Gaza, and so much of it because of the unyielding American support for Tel Aviv. All right, Will, that's what I have for today. Do you have anything else?
That'd be it.
Right.
I just tell people to find me at Anti-War Libertarian Institute.
That's you'll be back on the show before a couple of years this time. So everybody look forward to seeing Will's face more in the future. And thank you all so much for tuning in.